All right, so we're just going to give a couple of minutes for people to join in. So welcome to everybody who's joined us. Richard is joining us again from out in the glass house. My background is completely fake, so sorry about that. I'm in the nice warm office in here. I don't suppose it's particularly chilly out there though, Richard, for you?
No, it's slightly disturbingly mild actually at the moment everywhere. It's not quite right, but yeah, I've had the sun on my my face and working outside. It's been nice, but not quite right.
And you've got some lovely Crown Prince squashes behind you there.
Yes, all sorts of squash to keep the chef happy. I've got my I think you can see them there. The Vif de Tomp, they're sort of 7-8 kilos each. Chef loves those because preparing one at the beginning of the week gives him dishes for the whole week. So yeah, keep the kitchen going, and we have enough for the shop as well on the box scheme this year.
Yeah.
But they're not for carving. So anybody who happens to be here who's bought one, they're far too good quality for carving. They're for eating.
Okay, that's it. That's interesting, and I want to come back to that in a second. But first of all, can you solve this riddle for me, maybe? Is a Crown Prince a squash or a pumpkin?
It's one of those purely semantic things that doesn't interest you very much. It's just 20 years ago from seed catalogues, I bought the seeds called gourds. That's what squash were sold as then from the seed catalogues. A pumpkin is a particular type of squash, that's all. And it's become, pumpkin has come to mean the tasteless Halloween ones for carving, basically.
Yeah. Okay, so they're all the same, just different varieties.
Yeah, I mean, even courgette's a squash. For a grower, as you know, you buy seeds, either summer squash or winter squash is what they're in the seed catalogues as, and a courgette is just a summer squash.
Yeah, interesting. So that family would include courgettes, gourds, squashes, and pumpkins, effectively all being the same thing, just a variation.
Yes, yeah, they're just. I mean, plant breeders are pretty good. They've bred all the different shapes and sizes and tastes for us. But chefs are obsessed actually with Crown Prince. It wouldn't, which if they want it, they get it. It wouldn't be my favourite. I love the little acorn squashes, like this little fella. Now they're the tastiest for me, but it's it's nice to have the range, and chef does different things for different ones.
Yeah. And I guess there's something about the Crown Prince. It's the pale skin makes it feel like it's not going to be brilliant, and then you open it and it's this lovely vibrant flesh.
Yeah, you love them as well. I mean, I don't dislike them, but it's certainly, and they're great storing ability.
Yeah.
I should imagine they'll still be sitting here in January, some of them, And if you keep them in a cool pantry or something, you can be eating them next year quite happily.
Yeah.
They're as ever, as a grower, I grow what people want really, and chef is obsessed with them, so he gets them.
I remember being in Fallon and Burn in Dublin last year or a few years ago, and there was a Crown Prince squash, like exactly around the same size as the ones in the background there, for sale in there for €17. So that gives you a sense, Richard, of I hope you have your squashes under lock and key there in the glasshouse.
I certainly do.
Yeah. So there's 1 million pumpkins grown in Ireland apparently every year now for the Halloween carving market. And I saw in a supermarket there in Dublin the other day, like huge wooden crates outside the door of the supermarket, full of pumpkins. And like, what do you think as a grower? I suppose it's brilliant that there's there's some section of the horticulture world doing well from that is good news for growers in general. But it does strike me like there's a huge amount of waste in that they're just carved and then discarded probably, and most people not using the they aren't brilliant eaters, obviously, but they could be used to make a pumpkin soup or.
Yes, I made a soup with one because I used to grow up. My kids are too big now for that sort of thing. But when they were younger, I'd grow them a couple for Halloween. And I did make a soup, but it basically tasted of the sage and black pepper and butter that I cooked to put through in it, you know.
Yeah.
It was just a filler. Yeah, it's a bit of a waste, but interesting enough, I've seen a documentary on telly where in Alaska all the wildlife moves into town to eat the pumpkins left outside houses. You get moose and bears and things eating the pumpkins on the 1st of November. So if you've got any moose or bears in your garden, I suppose you give it to them.
I actually love that idea. I think that's brilliant. I've heard of people actually at least harvesting the seeds when they're kind of, you know, taking them out, and you can dry the seeds and use them for you know, use them in once they're dried out, they'll store for a while and so on. So there are ways.
Hens love them if you just boil them up for a few minutes, the seeds, and if you cut them open, they'll peck the flesh out very happily. So if you got hens, or actually pigs don't like them all that much, surprisingly, but they'll eat them. But if you give them to livestock, that's the best bet, I think.
Yeah. And another really interesting thing I saw, I suppose, somebody's saying there, Katrina's saying, I give the pumpkins to the chickens after Halloween. That's a nice one. The other thing I saw, which is I'm definitely going to try this year, is that if you when you're carving your pumpkin, putting your scary face or whatever onto it, if you mark out the, you know, the eyes and the face and so on, and then slightly grate the skin using like a grater or a microplane where the markings are, and then give it out to your hens, and they'll actually peck the bits, they'll peck out the holes for you, rather than you having to carve it at all, because they'll go after the bits where the skin has been kind of slightly grated. I don't know if it was Instagram kind of a magic video that had it, but they had this perfectly carved pumpkin after a few days. The hens had been pecking away at it.
It was just covered in chicken milk, so you couldn't have it inside, I suppose.
Yeah, well, there is that. I presume you could wash it.
Yes.
You don't.
Or buy a sharp knife, I suppose.
You don't sound convinced, but
anyway. It seems like an awful lot of trouble. You can just get a knife and cut the holes out, but there we go.
Well, true. That's true. And actually, the worst part about carving a pumpkin is not it's not the cutting out the eyes. It's actually scooping out the flesh from the inside, I think. So you can't get your hens to do that. So that's that.
If you had bantams, maybe they could get inside, but there we go.
Yes, that's true. How are the hens doing in Curmore, Richard? So we have.
They're thriving now. I had one group that was behaving very strangely and didn't like going out. Possibly I saw them this morning when I was collecting the eggs and feeding them. On the Curmore estate, which is great, there's lots of birds of prey, and a buzzard takes in it, and they all ran in when they saw the buzzard. He seems to have taken an interest in them. Maybe that's partly it, but they're going out more, which is great for their health and great for the quality of the eggs, eating the grass. One group piles straight out and hammers the grass, but the other group still need a bit of active encouragement. But no, they're laying full production now, and they seem happy and healthy, which is the idea.
Yeah. And will they, I presume they'll lay straight through the winter? I know some, you know, with slightly older birds, if you have a flock at home, they can.
Yes, the first year, if you get them coming in to lay, which we did in the early autumn, generally their biological urge to lay takes them through the winter. If they do start dropping off, which is possible, I'll have to get some battery lights in there. We don't have power up to there. So I'll drop a couple of battery torches or something in. So keep an eye on it. Obviously, well, legally you have to record production every day. So you're keeping a close eye on it, because that's the first indication something's wrong if production drops off. So
yeah, okay. Very good. So other than that, what's big in the garden we're nearly into November, hard to believe, but what's big in terms of garden kind of tasks, I suppose, in the month ahead?
Well, in terms of Chef is in the Caribbean at the moment. So, but he's coming back, which is something to look forward to for him, to all the winter routes. We're sort of switch harvesting, and he's got the list of things we have ahead of him. All the parsnips, celeriac, the winter leeks. We have Jerusalem artichokes, yacon, mashua, scorzonera, which so it's a flip over for him. You come in and get more roasted roots and root soups and roots done in 1,000 different ways. That's the winter for you, really. So it's that sort of switch, but we're still the end of the summer cropping and autumn cropping, like celery and white and red cabbage pouring out of Curramore at the moment. So yeah, it's a season of bounty, and then after Christmas things start tightening up in terms of what you have available, and it all gets tighter and tighter till we're in the hungry gap, and then we're going again. So the cycle, as ever.
Okay, very good. So I suppose for the backyard grower, of which I am one, it feels like like similar scenario in that there's plenty of stuff still in the beds. I'm starting to kind of, turn like beds that are finished, where I've finished cropping. I'm starting to think about what to do with them and getting some kind of a cover onto them of the various things we talked about last month, the green manures and the compost, covering them with compost. And actually, we have our podcast with Charles Dowding is that episode's coming out on Tuesday of next week, I think, which a lot of people would be interested in, obviously around no dig, and he has a new book out about composting, which is so we talk a lot about compost in that session, so do check that out. So I guess we've got a lot of questions here. Our topic for the month is specifically around crop rotation, but we might come to that in about 10 or 15 minutes time and handle these questions first, Richard. I don't know if you've seen these in advance, but either way,
I did, yeah.
Okay, cool. And please do, for any of you on the call live, please do pop any questions that you have in the chat, and we'll try and get to those as well. So I'm going to start with a kind of this one should be easy enough to pick off. I think it's Phyllis is asking. She said, "Is supermarket garlic okay to sow?" To use for sowing, I suppose, and when is the best time to plant it?
The answer is no, not because there's anything intrinsically wrong with it, but it might not have come. Now, if you buy it from an Irish grower and he tells you it's autumn garlic, that's fine, or she tells you, but it could well be a variety which is suitable for the climate in Spain or China. And we want garlic that's suitable for our climate. So it's usually produced in the UK for us. And you also want an autumn garlic, obviously, if you're planting in autumn. So you really are much better off buying an autumn planting garlic from we're selling it here, but from a seed merchant, because you know what you're getting then. You would get quite poor results, most probably, if you put a Chinese variety in. It wouldn't be adapted to our climate.
Right, interesting. And I always had in my head that, like, this idea that you might unwittingly bring a kind of onion white rot or something in the garden by using supermarket garlic, and that the stuff you're buying is kind of certified disease-free. But
it's not certified. No. I mean, many different things are certified disease-free, like your seed potatoes or strawberry runners and so on. But that's not the case with garlic. And in fact, from a seed merchant who will remain unnamed, I had autumn planting onions, which the annoying thing was I didn't even buy them for the garden. They were left over from the shop, and I put them in. And that brought white rot into the garden. So I actually brought it in by using planting onion sets. Since then, I've never grown onions from set. But I've no personal knowledge or known anybody who has introduced white rot with garlic. So unfortunately, you're not buying guaranteed disease-free. You're buying a variety which is suited for our climate.
Yeah. And somebody I know, Clodagh, said to me in the shop, so we, as you said, we've got garlic, growing garlic for sale in Larder at the moment. And Clodagh was saying somebody was asking her, was it Irish? And she said no, and they were a little bit miffed about that. But actually, we only have, as far as I know, 2 commercial growers of garlic in Ireland. One is up in Drogheda. There's one in Cork as well. So like having Irish garlic, Irish grown garlic, would be almost impossible to get. I think most of it's grown in the Isle of Man, I think, for UK and Ireland. Is that?
Yes.
That?
A lot of smaller growers grow it and probably aren't registered as growing garlic. When I had a market stall, I grew it, but I sold all of it green. I like to process it here green, actually. There's no point in trying to compete with the imported dried garlic from China, which is imported by the ton. But selling it as, which we'll have in our boxes next year, little small bulbs of green garlic before it's dried off. Then you get a nice price for it. It's a lovely thing, actually. It's nothing finer in a stir fry or a sort of coconut milk type curry. So yeah, a lot of growers will grow it as a green crop, not a dried crop. I'd recommend people at home, actually, because one bit of dried garlic tastes like another, really. Unless you're going for one of the unusual connoisseurs to the varieties. But green garlic is something special and not that readily available.
Yeah. I think the two somebody was asking about the Irish growers of it at scale, I suppose. West Cork garlic is one. I don't know whether they sell sort of growing garlic, but they certainly sell eating garlic you can buy online. And Drummond House is the one in Drogheda that is producing quite a lot of it, I believe, as well. But they sell into supermarkets and things. It's not for growing. So, yeah, and Phyllis has also asked there about the best time to sow it. So I'm guessing like this month is your sort of sweet spot for doing it, right?
Sorry, are you fading on me there, Mick? Sorry.
Sorry, I was saying November is the ideal month for sowing garlic.
Very much so, yeah. When I've done sort of observational trials, I found going in early October, they don't tend to do quite as well as going a bit later, and November's very much the best month. Yeah, anytime from late October to first week or so in December, and they'll be a little bit later if you put them in early December, but they'll still grow fine. And it's the most frost hardy crop I know. In the really, really cold winters we had about 13, 14 years ago, things like Savoy cabbage, Brussels sprouts were just annihilated in the field, turned to mush. And I remember the garlic appearing as the snow was melting, little green shoots shooting up, which is a welcome sight when you had a lot of crops written off by the weather.
Yeah. All right, that's that. Kieran is asking, what should you follow on with after potatoes? I'm assuming you
right. Yeah, with rotations, there's a bizarre thing in some gardening books that there's an ideal rotation that I've seen total crap like roots should follow, leaves should follow, I don't know, Christmas baubles or something. And that's nonsense. The only reason you have a rotation in a garden, and it's a very important reason, is you're controlling soil-borne pests and diseases. So if you put onions in continually, you'd almost certainly develop in the end a white rot problem. Cabbages continually develop clubroot. Potatoes, you develop a potato wheelworm problem. So if you move them around the garden, then the problems never develop. That's the only reason you do it. Anything else is so much crap, really. But in terms of what follows potatoes, there are some practical considerations, and one of them would be you nearly always leave a few potatoes in the ground, even if you dig carefully, and they pop up as an annoying weed in the next year. So you wouldn't want anything growing that is very fine and fiddly, for instance, carrots or onions, which you wouldn't be able to dig get the potatoes out. So a widely spaced crop like cabbages or cauliflowers will be great. Or say peas in rows, and between the rows you could get rid of the potatoes self-sowing. But that'd be the only consideration, really.
Yeah, I suspect what Kieran is referring to there, though, is that he's just taken his main crop potatoes out now, and he's wondering, can he sow anything at this stage as a follow-on to?
Oh, right, sorry, yes. Well, garlic, overwintered broad beans, overwintered onions if you want to risk white rot. And you just in time, if you don't want to grow anything, to put a green manure down of something like Landsberger mix. You just about get it established if you put it in now.
Very good. I because I like living on the edge on the wild side, I did sow overwintering onion sets in my polytunnel about 2 weeks ago, and they've germinated already. And we did it last year, and we got a lovely early crop of onions and spring onions, I suppose, early in the spring as well. So I ignored your advice on that, Richard. You'd be glad to hear.
Well, you'll do that at your peril, Mick, but
I know.
There we go.
I know. Next question then. David is saying he's got placing fallen leaves on top. I presume he means on top of raised beds or something, or beds as ground cover, and then covering for the winter, then digging and mixing it into the soil in springtime. Is this a form of leaf mold, or does it need to be left for longer?
Longer, really. If you're not going to dig it in and you're going to leave it on the surface, it will be fine. But leaves, trees, basically, a deciduous tree, defecate once a year. They put all the things they don't like into the leaves and they fall onto the ground. And they often have things which suppress other plants or slightly toxic to soil bacteria, fungi, and so on. If you think about a beechwood, often you have a completely bare base, which the leaves are effectively acting partly as a ground cover to prevent weeds, but they also chemically suppress weeds to some extent. So, leaf mold is a really valuable thing to have in a garden. You can always put it on the surface, put it round fruit trees, or if you're going to do very much a no-dig thing, you can leave it on the surface and then just pull it to one side and drop things like cabbage plants in and so on in the spring. But I wouldn't incorporate it in the soil. Because it's liable to suppress growth of crops next year.
Yeah, and David, I would say to you, if you are on the call as well, you should probably listen to Charles Dowding about. I was surprised actually at how virulently anti-digging and any form of tilling he was, and so that'd be worth a listen. And he also said, interestingly, you could store your fallen leaves beside your compost heap, and then use them as the brown layer, as you need them during the year, which I thought was a nice little idea.
Well, the traditional way with leaf mold that I would have known working on traditional estates in my younger days, you had 3 bins, and you would be using the stuff that in the oldest bin, and you filled it up once a year. So it'd be getting on, 2.5 years old when you put it round as a mulch in the spring. It does really decomposes very slowly with some specialized fungi, and then you have a lovely product. But it's the ideal thing. It's basically where people now use, say, bark mulch. They'd have used leaf mold. You'd put it around herbaceous borders or fruit bushes or whatever, but you'd let it rot down well first.
Could you use it for mulching paths in the polytunnel, I wonder?
You could, yes, because it takes a while to decompose. So it does tend to get a bit slippy underfoot if it gets wet. So somebody your age could start slipping, Mick, if you weren't careful,
Okay. Connor is asking, he said he's starting to prepare an area in the back garden to grow veg for the first time. So welcome, Connor, to the madness. He's a complete novice. What should I start with? It's like going into travel agents and saying, I want to go away. I'm not sure where I want to go, but I just want to go away. So that's the kind of question you have there, Richard. What should he start with?
Holidays, growers don't have them, Mick. Travel agents, go and seed merchants rather. But anyway, to start, I would start with something nice and easy where there's a quick return and you get something which is extra tasty. better than a shop. So I wouldn't bother putting anything in now unless you fancy a bit of green garlic in the spring. A very easy crop, just bang it in about 20 centimeters between each garlic to give them plenty of room. So you could put that in, or wait till the spring and sow some salad leaves, because you get a return within a month. In the spring, maybe 6-7 weeks, when the things get a bit colder, and you get something which is far nicer than you'll buy in a shop. Why not get yourself a few strawberry plants and drop them in? Because again, fresh strawberries straight off the plant are tastier than anything else, and they're quite straightforward to grow. So look for things like salads or strawberries, which you think, wow, this is worthwhile.
Very good. Susan is asking, she says she grows in a lot of large containers and she empties the containers at the end of the season. What's the best way to handle this or reuse to avoid disease and other problems? So is that well, stuff coming out of containers to go on the compost heap, or what do we think?
Well, I wouldn't compost. It's already in here. We won't compost. If you're using potting compost, which I assume is what she's using, then you want to replace all of that every year. And the stuff that you get out, you can throw it on your beds, throw it as a mulch. Don't bother putting potting compost into a compost heap because it can't decompose anymore. Just tip it straight out on your garden. If it's soil in your containers, then you can revitalize the soil by adding some of your own homemade compost and so on. But potting compost sort of loses its nature in a year, really, and you don't get good crops the second year. So put fresh in.
Yeah, very good. And Barbara is asking for next spring, can she grow salads in the same grow box as this year? So I presume she has some kind of either a raised bed or a planter of some description, Richard.
I'd buy a planter again. I would buy more potting compost.
Yeah.
And actually, it was just show you there, we have an awful lot here. Making a moment of madness, decided we'd have a whole pallet full for sale in the shop. So anybody who wants to buy it from us, we have no shortage of potting compost at all. Organic peat. I'll just do a bit of a plug there. Please use peat-free compost, because the environmental impact of using peat-based compost is absolutely horrific. So don't use it. Yeah,
I totally agree, which is why I bought a whole pallet of it for us to sell in Grow HQ. Really.
Well, yeah, absolutely, Mick. You're an optimistic man, so I'm sure it's going to fly out the shop like hotcakes.
Absolutely. So what else have we got here? Yeah, so Robert is asking, I think we've covered that as well, a separate question. Robert, is there a good crop to grow in the same location after potatoes? So I think we've answered that question already. And then a very, very interesting question from Donna. How does intercropping affect crop rotation? So I suppose if you're
that's very interesting, and it's a difficult. That's a new question coming. I think I didn't see that before we started.
I like just to throw in a bit of a curveball for you towards the end, just to make you uncomfortable.
It take more than that, Mick. Yeah, now there's a short and there's a long answer.
Well, first of all, maybe explain for people that aren't sure what intercropping is. What is she referring to there?
Intercropping is where you grow 2 or more crops in the same area. So you might have a row of cabbage with a row of radish in between them, or something like that.
Yeah.
The short answer is, I suppose they're combined, really. So the short answer is I would tend to want to grow intercrop with the same thing, like the example, the same family that I gave there, with radishes in between cabbages or cauliflowers, because then you can have a rotation. But having said that, when I worked in East Africa, traditional gardens there were a incredibly complicated mosaic of intercropping with different crops, which is what the permaculture people advocate. And if you have all of these things going on, you're emulating a natural ecosystem. and you probably won't develop problems with soil-borne pests and diseases because there's such a mix going on. So if you're brave enough, just grow what the hell you like as a crazy mixture. Critically though, throw huge amounts of organic matter on the soil. That will mitigate against soil-borne pest diseases, and you'll probably get away with it. But you need to really go for a mixture. So you're really encouraging a whole range of different fungi and bacteria, and you're creating a vibrant ecosystem. A little bit of a row here and a little bit of a row there won't work. But if you're really going to go with a permaculture type thing of mixing it up, then you probably develop a system which is immune to pests and diseases, probably. But that's for me, one of the most fascinating things about growing. Give it a try and see what happens,
Yeah, that's good advice. And Richard, just like in general, which you were saying, some of the sort of really intricate crop rotation plans that talk about you leave certain nutrients behind in the soil for the following year for a different class of veg and so on, not being up to much. But what is the crop rotation that you follow at Grow HQ? Like, is there is a system there that you're using to move everything around?
Okay, yeah, just to answer the first one, if you're looking at agricultural rotations, is what I did in research many years ago. Yes, it's organic systems, particularly. It's very important that you're managing nutrient flow with different things. So you would put in oats later than wheat because wheat needs more fertility after you've ploughed in a grass lay. So that's where garden people get confused, because that is the case with arable rotations. So just to answer that one, not the case in a back garden because we're putting fertility in with compost or fertilizer, throughout the growing cycle.
But Richard, just to stop you there, right? Because this is important. I'd say if you took out 100 growing books, 99 of them will say in your crop rotation, if you follow brassicas, if you have brassicas coming after legumes, that the brassicas will benefit from the nitrogen left behind. Now, I don't want you to go into a big lecture on nitrogen nodules, please, but is there no truth in that? Is that what you're saying? That they're
not on a back garden scale? No, it's gardening books just repeat the same crap one after the other, really. I mean, professional growers wouldn't use them.
Apart from my books, obviously.
Oh, of course, apart from your books, Mick, they're invaluable. Yep. No, that's very, very much how you manage arable rotations in agriculture, particularly organic agriculture. But there is very little nitrogen left after growing peas and beans. They don't fix very much anyway, and the residual amount left in the soil next year will be significant if you're growing a crop of organic wheat. Is not significant if you're growing a crop of cabbages.
Okay. The other one that's generally mentioned, I think, is that you put your brassicas in and then follow them with roots, and the idea there being that the brassicas have used up a lot of nitrogen from the soil because they're heavy nitrogen feeders, I suppose, and then the root crops don't need nitrogen so much, particularly carrots and stuff. Is that also a nonsense?
Well, that's true on an arable scale. If you're using the nitrogen, I mean, we've not put any nitrogen out on our land in Coromor because the fertile grass is releasing the nitrogen for our crops. If you did that for a couple of years, then you would be running out of nitrogen.
Yeah.
But it's irrelevant in a garden because we put compost and fertilizer out every year. So that's where all of your fertility, it's so. It's not that it's total rubbish to science. It's just that it's rubbish in the practical context of a garden because you're fertilizing every crop.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. So I think I've spoken before on this on last year about I used the people love bunches of roses mnemonic to remember the rotation that I use, and I'll pop that in the chat in a second. But Richard, what's the one that you use in Grow HQ then? How do you break down the different?
The reasons for this are purely individual reasons for me, and the quantity I have to do with the kitchen. So if you copy this, then you shouldn't be allowed out on a garden, really, because it's purely thinking that, what I need. Anyway, I combine two different unrelated families within each. The garden's divided into four. And in any one year, each of the quarters will have two unrelated families in, which allows me to have a rotation within the year. For instance, overwintered garlic is followed by French beans. I pull it out green, I can put French beans in. So one bed is alliums, the onion family, garlic, onions, so on, and the legumes, peas and beans. By the same token, I do overwintered broad beans, and they're followed by leeks for the summer. Then the next bed has carrots and parsnips, beetroot, chard in, two different families there. The next bed has potatoes and mainly potatoes, but a few other different types of roots. Nothing to do with them being roots, it just they happen to end up there. Things like scores and Jerusalem artichokes and so on. And then the fourth bed has the pumpkin family, the squashes, courgettes, and the brassicas. So that pretty much covers everything I need. And when I originally sat down to plan it, it was based on the amounts of different crops that chef wanted, quantities. So that really is, with your own garden. Remember, if you're opening up a garden, don't put any more than a quarter in any one thing, like a quarter in cabbages, a quarter in potatoes, because you'll mess it up for future years for you. So start off, divide the garden into four, and decide on what you want to grow. But you can't go any more than a quarter in any one family.
Okay, so if you had, say, 3 raised beds, which is like, let's say in the TV garden here in Grow HQ, we've got 3 kind of 2-meter raised beds. What would you be thinking there as the major groups?
Well, critically, whatever you wanted to grow, and say you really fancied pumpkins and squashes. So you'd have one bed in pumpkins and squashes, and then you would move that round so it's 1 year in 3 then.
Yeah.
And if you really wanted to grow potatoes, 1 year in 3 with the beds. And I would probably follow, just as an example, the potatoes with the squashes, because you'll get self-sown potatoes popping up. Your pumpkins are a meter apart. There's no trouble digging the self-sown potatoes out. And then if you have like a third bed in something fiddly, like salad crops, they tend to be brassicas, but you could keep, if you weren't growing any other brassicas, that'd be fine. Say carrots, parsnips, all the seeded stuff. The year after the pumpkins, because you've got all the seed potatoes out then. So that'd just be, if they were the things you wanted to grow, that'd be handy off the shelf rotation. But don't get bogged down with particularly what follows what. Just make sure they're separated.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the key kind of message from today, I think, is, keep moving things around, but don't stress too much about, what you put where or what follows what.
Apart from the very interesting question about intercropping, and if that person wants to really develop an interest in a sort of a permaculture idea, the forest garden that I would have seen in East Africa, and develop, or the English cottage gardens from a few generations ago, people do seem to be able to get away. And the critical thing is putting lots and lots of compost in. Do seem to be able to get away with mixing and matching, as long as there's a huge amount of mixing and matching going on.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, so just a couple of kind of notes, I suppose, before we finish up. We will have our final in the veg patch of the year at the end of November, which is, I think, the 29th of November. That's planting and pruning. Richard, you have a course coming up this weekend in Grow HQ. I think it's sold out as far as I know.
I had to sneeze there. Yes, it's completely full, which is great. But yeah, no one else can join it.
Yeah, very good. Well, enjoy that. And yeah, as I said at the outset, we've a new episode of our podcast, Food Matters, with Charles Dowding as the guest on Tuesday, which is a brilliant conversation, some really practical. And actually, Richard, you and Charles are very similar in terms of sort of exploding the myths and conventions of growing, which I think is brilliant. It's very liberating for people to hear. So that's that.
Though he's a bit of a beginner. I saw he'd only got 35 years growing experience, but so he's still learning, I assume. But
yeah, he is. He's only a whippersnapper by compared to you.
He'll get there.
Yeah. So that's coming up as well, and we'll have a whole range of. I think I'm right in saying that the one on Sunday is our last in-person growing course for the year, but we do have some cookery events coming up in November and December, and then we will have before Christmas, I think by around the end of November, we'll have our full schedule of courses for next year in Grow HQ and online. Will be up on our website for the Christmas present of your dream. Thanks, Catherine, saying everything this year is sold out. So that's really good for us, but not so good for you if you want to join them. But anyway, that's all good stuff. And as I said, myself and Richard will be back at the end of November. If you're in or near Waterford, do check out all of our new things here in Grow HQ. We've got our larder. The veg box is all the lovely veg coming out of Curramore. People collecting their veg on a Saturday morning, which is fantastic. And lots of other good stuff happening as well. So have a great weekend ahead, everyone. Bank holiday weekend. Hope we get to get out and enjoy some fine weather before the hour goes back. Don't forget the hour goes back, and don't be late for your appointments on Sunday. And thanks, Richard, for joining us, and everyone for
thanks everybody.
Great questions. And we'll see you next month. Thanks, guys.